All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to EN100 Introduction to College Composition. This is week 2 of our class together. I really apologize for the extremely delayed start. It's been quite a morning for me over here in sunny Kansas City. Hope things are going well for you guys over in Colorado. I had everything set up and was there early, and the first classroom that I was in was not working at all. So I went to my alternative classroom, and it looks like some things got kind of wonky in here as well, so it took a while. So my apologies. I'm glad that we're able to start now. Let me know in the chat if you're having trouble hearing me or seeing me. As this is a new classroom, I didn't really have time to mess around with the camera, so just let me know if there's any technical problems. Hopefully everything is going well right now. I see that a couple of you are in the chat, or a few of you are in the chat. That's fantastic, so keep that up. I've got it pulled up here on my computer, and I'll be interacting with you as you go. So any questions and things like that, we'll use the chat feature. What I want you to be doing is to kind of think through questions that you have about writing. And I believe last week, one of your journal assignments was actually to think about questions that you had about writing. But I didn't really have you turn that in. That's one of your journal entries. But go ahead right now, if you've got that with you, and I hope you do, I hope you have your journal there with you, go ahead and drop any questions that you have about writing into the chat. That helps me to kind of design the course and tailor it specifically to what you guys need. So if there's any questions you have about writing, I may answer them today if we have time, and if it's something that's relevant to what we're talking about. I may work in answers to your questions in a later video. It's also possible that I'll even change kind of the direction that we're heading in this class to address some of these questions that you have. So just be aware of that. That's one thing that I'd love to do. So anything that you've got, hey, great, we're good with audio. Fantastic. Okay, that is perfect. Thank you, guys. Looks like, so I think there's, yeah, everybody looks like we're on the chat, so that's fantastic. Well, today we're going to be talking about the writing process. I'm really excited because I think this is one of the things that if you guys learn this and you get it down right now, like we talked about just a little bit last week, if you get this down, you're going to be all set in the rest of your courses, because writing is something that you do at the college level, something you do in high school, it's something that you do in the real world. And if you don't follow a process that we know works, a process that follows the way that God designed your brain, then it's going to be really difficult for you. Not that as soon as you learn this today, suddenly it's going to be the easiest thing in the world and it's going to be no effort at all. That's not what I'm talking about. But it would be like trying to dig a hole with a spoon compared to a power shovel, right? You want to use the right tool for the job. So we're going to compare different processes today. We're going to talk through how we used to think about writing, how some of you may already be thinking about writing, and how maybe if you alter your process, your writing is going to come a lot easier, okay? Today is actually part 1 in which I'm going to introduce the whole writing process to you. We're going to kind of get a big picture of it. And then we're going to zoom into kind of the first part of the writing process and experiment with it. It's a blast. I think you'll love it. We're going to be talking about brainstorming. And by the way, brainstorming is probably something that you've done before. You may have had other high school classes or elementary classes where you've had to brainstorm. Maybe you've heard about that. But it's quite possible that you're not doing it right. Okay? Not that you're evil or something like that, but that you're not using your brain to its full capacity the way that God designed it. Because a lot of times we approach brainstorming in kind of a pretty straightforward way that's not as helpful as it's supposed to be. And what I'm going to teach you today is something that's based on brain science that'll help you get a lot of ideas for papers, short stories, poems, whatever. And it's one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal. So that's coming up today. That's going to be our focus. Next week, we're going to hit writing process part 2, where we zoom in on free writing and then the rest of the writing process from there. Okay? So let's warm up with an activity today. Go ahead and get ready for this. Now, I'm assuming that you guys are in a classroom all together where you can kind of talk to each other. Am I right about that? I hope I am. Can someone tell me in the chat, are you guys able to talk to each other? Or are you at home in your pajamas? All right, fantastic. So in this activity, what you're going to do is you're going to explain to your classmates a process that you know. Maybe how to cook something, how to do a hobby, anything like that. Try to think of something that your classmates don't know how to do. I'm going to give you a few minutes to work on this, but let me actually kind of model for you what I'm looking for. It doesn't have to be super long, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you how to make a stained glass window, because I used to make stained glass. It's awesome. I love that process, and I think it's really interesting because I've always admired stained glass, but in college I got the opportunity to work in a stained glass studio and to take some stained glass classes, and I was just amazed at how much work goes into it. So real briefly, let me walk you through that process, and then it'll be your turn. Each of you take a turn and share some kind of process with your classmates. Okay, so if you're going to make a stained glass window, first you need some kind of design. You can design it yourself from a drawing, or there's a lot of patterns that are available, okay? And you make these little puzzle pieces, whether it's your own puzzle pieces that you create or this pattern, and you've got these little cardboard puzzle pieces, and then you find glass that's going to be kind of the right color. But the glass comes in these big sheets that you have to handle with care, wearing special gloves, otherwise you'll cut your hands open, and it's not pretty, believe me. And you have to be careful not to shatter the glass, because glass kind of shatters just by looking at it. Anyway, so you take that to your table, you put your puzzle pieces down, and you trace the puzzle patterns onto these different pieces of glass. So now you got these big sheets with tiny puzzle pieces on them. And then what you've got to do is you have to very carefully cut the glass to that shape. And we use a special cutting tool that kind of scores the glass. It makes the best sound in the world. Like, it makes me so happy. The tool looks a little bit like a pizza cutter, but on a miniature scale, and it kind of goes zzz, kind of like a zipper, and it just zips around, and you cut open the glass, and then you kind of have to snap it a little bit with some pliers, and now you've got some roughly shaped puzzle pieces that are about the size that you want, but they're not going to smoothly fit together, so you have to grind them down. And you use a grinding machine, and you grind all the pieces down, and then you kind of make this puzzle. So if you love puzzles, you'll love stained glass, because there's a lot of that. You get this puzzle piece thing together in your stained glass window, but now you've got to fit them together with hot molten metal, which is pretty awesome. And we use a technique of actually creating a metal trench that then the molten metal will go into. So you've got to fit that metal trench. It's kind of like, I think it's basically, some of it's lead. So you bend this lead trench around all the pieces, which takes a really long time. And then you put the molten metal in there, and the whole thing solidifies, and now you've got yourself a big window. And because of all the chemicals and hot stuff and glass and all of that, it needs a good clean at the end. And then finally you've got yourself a beautiful stained glass window without a frame. So then you got to frame the thing, and then you can hang it up in your house, and it looks beautiful. That whole process, depending on the size of the window, could take anywhere from like 8 hours to a whole week or even longer. So it's a pretty involved process. Anyway, now it's your turn. You share a process with your classmates, and then in the chat, tell me when you guys are all done. Maybe say all done or something like that. Go for it. All right, I've got the all done from you guys. Thank you. So I wish I was there to be able to hear what you guys talked about. That would be fantastic. But I'm not. If you could drop in just kind of the subject like stained glass or chess or something like that, I'd love to know what you shared. That would be great. So let's go ahead. We're going to transition into talking about the writing process by first looking at our journal activity number 4. So hopefully at this point I know we cut last week short, but you should have the first 3 journal activities. We're going to do journal entry number 4 today. So get your journal out and put journal number 4 and my writing process is the title. Make sure you have today's date as well on that. Ooh, we got character design, self-defense, braid, how to choke someone out. My goodness. I may need some clarification there. Sounds violent. Okay, so journal entry number 4, my writing process. What I want you to do is I want you to describe your writing process. You just talked to your classmates about a process for some kind of activity, but now let's think about writing processes. How do you get ideas for papers, short stories, anything that you're writing? And how do you develop those ideas into a product to submit to your teachers? Kind of think step by step here. I want you to think very clearly through what's kind of the common things that you do as you approach a writing assignment. Now, it's possible that you may not have done a lot of writing assignments for school, and you can write that in the journal too, but think through then how do you go about writing? Okay, or how would you if you haven't done a lot of assignments? So, oh, thanks for the clarification, Joshua. That's great. So, okay, yeah, self-defense. That makes a whole lot more sense. Thank you. Okay, so so then the writing process. Then go ahead and do this journal entry. We're going to take about 5 minutes to do this. So I'm going to set a timer, and then after that, we'll all be done. All right, go ahead and begin working right now. All right, let's go ahead and finish up that activity. You can finish up the current sentence that you're working on or something like that. I would like you to finish up this activity. If you didn't get all the way done right now, that's fine. Just finish it up a little bit later, or if you have some extra time during another activity in this class, you can finish that. So I'd love to hear kind of what your process is, and since we can't talk directly like this, go ahead right now, take a couple of minutes to drop a quick summary in the chat. So maybe list it step by step or something like that. The chat will only allow you 200 words, so try to keep it short and succinct, but I kind of like to see what your process is. And this way too, your classmates can kind of see what each other's process is as well. So we kind of just get that idea and can learn from each other here. So go ahead and take a couple of minutes to get that set up, and then all right, guys, thanks for your comments. That was awesome. I love how we're using the chat. Looks like that system is working pretty well. Even though we do have a slight delay, that's okay. This is, I think, a good way for us to interact. Now I kind of know where you're coming from and can gear the lesson to our needs here. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the writing process. So is the writing process like this? This is the way that a lot of people tend to think about the writing process. We've got an essay moving down an assembly line, and then we ship it to our teacher, whether that be through email or a Canvas as we use, or printing out a paper and handing it to the teacher, whatever the method is. We just send that idea that direction. That's how a lot of people think about writing, but that's not really the writing process, how it works. And maybe instead of using a metaphor, let's kind of illustrate the way that people think the brain works scientifically. So what I have here is an example of that. As you can see, we've got So here's you, all right? So you're a little blue because you have to write a paper. And you've got an idea in your brain, and you put it on the paper, and you hand it in to your teacher or your professor, okay? So this is actually the way that we've thought about writing for many years. Teachers thought this way, students thought this way, and then researchers begin to kind of question, how does the brain actually work? And they begin to study actual writers in the way that actual writers kind of think and act and write, and they interviewed them. You can actually do the same study yourself. If you go online and look for interviews with maybe your favorite author, or maybe look up books on how to write, you'll come to the same conclusion, which this is not at all how people actually write. This is not an effective writing process. Your brain is not designed to just get an idea suddenly and transmit it to the paper. It's a lot more complicated than that, and Josh, I think you said it well, it's also messy. It's a whole lot messier than this. So two things that you should know. First, if you feel like your writing process is kind of messy, I don't want you to feel bad about that. That's a good thing. Writing is supposed to be messy. Sometimes, especially those of us who are perfectionists, Zach, I'm looking at you, tend to think like, okay, it's got to be completely perfect immediately, and that's just not really how anything works. If you think about it, when you were learning to walk many, many years ago, probably you fell down immediately as you first started to try, and it took a long time of stumbling around to try to figure it out. Sometimes there's a few exceptions in a classroom. Zach, maybe you're the exception here, where you just immediately got up and started walking perfectly. But typically, people take a long time to learn a skill. And think about some of those hobbies and skills that you guys were sharing with each other earlier: self-defense, braiding. What was the other one? I'm forgetting now off the top of my head. But as you're working through those, as you were learning those skills, it took a lot of practice. It took a lot of errors. And it was kind of a messy process. That's the reality. That's the writing process. And so if you learn to embrace that, you can actually use that messy routine to create something that truly is magnificent. Okay? Now, what does the writing process actually look like? If you study authors, if you study brain science, what do you find out about the brain? Well, it doesn't look at all like this picture that we have up here. It looks a little bit more like this right here. So here's you again. You're still blue because you have to write a paper. But you have an idea. But that idea is something that comes from planning and reading and talking and brainstorming and writing. But you also have ideas already in your head that you bring to your planning and your reading and your talking and your brainstorming and your writing. Okay, so you may have kind of a beginning of an idea in your head, like, I'd kind of like to write about this thing. And then you go down and do some planning activities, you read about it a little bit, but you're still thinking about this idea in your head. But then maybe you change the idea because this one thing that you read, you think, well, that's kind of a cool idea. And then you go home and you talk about the idea with your mom and dad. You're like, hey, I've got this idea. What do you think about this idea? And they say, you know what, that idea, is not really from a biblical worldview. Have you considered that? And you're like, oh my gosh, I hadn't considered that. So you go back and think about it a little bit more. You come up with another idea. You do some more brainstorming. You write about it for a little bit. You talk to it with your friends. Bring it back to your mom and dad, and you talk about it with them again. They're like, yes, that's what we're talking about. And so then you go back to the planning phase. And so there's a lot of messiness that happens in here. Then you may come over and you start to do an outline for your paper. Okay, maybe you've learned how to do an outline. We're going to learn how to do that in this class. And you're required to do an outline. So you maybe been taught this before. So you make an outline. And then, has this ever happened to you? If so, put it in the chat. Say, yeah, this has happened to me. Has this ever happened to you where you create an outline for a paper and then you realize this is a horrible idea and you have to start over? Right? So you go back to the drawing board and you do some more planning, or maybe you have to go all the way back and start thinking about some ideas, or you get new ideas while you're creating the outline. You're kind of learning your paper as you go, as you create this outline. Maybe you get as far as being able to take your outline and actually start writing a draft. But you get stuck with writer's block. And so then you have to go back and do another outline, or go back and get some ideas, or even jump all the way back here to the planning and brainstorming phase. Maybe go talk to someone. Maybe you have to go and talk to your teacher or professor while you're drafting. And so we move in and between all these different phases. We're in and out of getting feedback on our papers. Sometimes this feedback is from our professors. Sometimes it's negative feedback. Sometimes it's positive feedback. Sometimes you get a grade at this stage, depending on what your class is. But you're doing multiple drafts. It's not just one draft. And then eventually, somehow, you get to this final product. There's not an arrow pointing to it, because when you finally get there, it just really depends. Okay? So that's kind of the way that this is, why this is so messy. Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat, Josh, oh man, you unscrewed a vent cover because you saw your dad do it. Yep. Yeah, so Zach, I like the way that you said that. You had to scrap an entire paper because of this problem, because it was too difficult to write about. And I'm going to give you a strategy a little bit this week, but also next week, where we're going to be talking about that very issue, and we're going to find a way to solve it earlier, so you don't have that really difficult problem of being, it's the night before a paper is due and you're working on it and you realize you've got the wrong topic. We want to try to realize that a little bit earlier in the process. Okay? So kind of what we're discussing here is writing is a very circular process. It's not move an idea from my head to a paper and turn it into my teacher. It's mess with, work with that idea, do lots of different activities to hone and perfect that idea, get a couple of drafts, work through those drafts, and then finally present that to my teacher in its finished, final, polished product. Okay? Now, if you go, this might be just a fun activity for you to do, go look up some of your favorite authors and see what their process is. Many of them will do this, and it's surprising. So let me give you a couple of examples. Stephen King, a very famous writer, he has written hundreds of books in the horror genre. He actually has a book called On Writing, where he kind of gives his autobiography on how he became a writer, but also his tips on how to write. And what's really interesting is he walks through a very similar process here, where he talks about sometimes how he gets ideas, which is really the easy part, which we'll talk more about here in a minute. But how to get ideas, and then how he develops those ideas. And he doesn't often do outlinings. You'll find there's some writers who do outlining and some who don't, or some who, and there's an arrow actually that indicates this, some who start drafting and they get a full manuscript for a book, then they do an outline. That's called retroactive outlining. That's outlining after you've got something done. So those are people who kind of fly by the seats of their pants. In fact, in the writing community, they're called pantsers. There's a term for that, just kind of a fun term. There's the plotters who do an outline first, and there's the pantsers who just write first. But they both arrive at the same conclusion, a organized story that for the pantsers started really messy, for the plotters started a little bit more detailed and a little bit more put together, and then they have that draft and then they work on it multiple times. Stephen King actually shares some of his rough draft stories and annotates how he begins going through the revising and editing process. And you think, oh my goodness, like I thought these guys would write and just have like perfect pieces that they present, but that's not how it works. The professional writers are ones who embrace this process right here. Now they get really good at it, okay? And so it might be a little bit easier and a little bit faster for them than it is for you when you're starting out, but they use the same process. You'll also learn too in this class that there's a lot of different tools for different steps in the writing process. Okay, so there's a lot of different drafting tools, and some of those will work for you and some of those won't, okay, depending on your personality type. You're going to learn a lot of different planning and brainstorming tools. Some of them are going to work for you and some of them are not. So don't give up on a process merely because they don't seem to work at first for you. There's two things that you need to do. First, test it to make sure that you are actually doing it right. Try it on multiple assignments, and you may find that maybe you just didn't do it right at first and it wasn't helpful for you on that assignment, but the more you do it, you get better at it. Okay, that's number one. Number two is, it could be that that is not geared to your personality type. Maybe your learning style that's not really suited for your learning style. And so there are other ideas that you can use, okay? By the way, your book actually has a lot of different tools in it to help you come up with ideas for papers and go through different parts of the writing process. Some of them I'll highlight for you, but some of them you're responsible for reading. That's why I give you those reading assignments. I'm not going to be walking through the book step by step. I will sometimes go through it and kind of highlight some things, but that doesn't mean the rest of it is unimportant, because this class is this part of the class is designed for us to interact with each other, for me to bring some additional material that highlights things in the text, brings things to you that are not in your textbook, present things from a biblical worldview, and then the book is also part of the class, and you should be doing that reading and learning from that reading as well. Okay, so there's a lot of good stuff in there. Even if I don't bring it up in class, does not mean it's not important. Does that make sense? Okay. Hopefully that does. Let me know if you have any questions about that. So this in general is kind of the messiness that it looks like. Let's actually write down step by step what that process is. So here it is. This is the writing process. There are, oh, you know what? I actually realized I was teaching this to my other class, and I realized that I actually forgot to put a step down here. So let me put it in. I'm going to put it in right in here. Realized I forgot that in the middle of their presentation, then I forgot to fix it on my PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. So this varies a little bit based on the type of assignment that you have. Okay, so if you're doing a short story, that's maybe going to be a little bit different than this. If you're doing a reflective writing assignment, that might be a little bit different. But in general, this is the writing process. So let's kind of walk through it. We're going to walk through it at a very high level right now, okay? We're going to get very specific on this next week. Right now, our goal is to kind of get just the basics of what the writing process is, answer any questions that you have about it, and then we're going to focus today mostly on brainstorming. Next week, we're going to be focusing on free writing, and then over the next couple of weeks, if you look on the syllabus, you'll see this. Over the next couple of weeks, we will model all of the rest of these stages during our presentations. So this is kind of a model for the rest of the class, where we're headed in these next 16 weeks, right? Now 15 weeks, okay? So first is the brainstorming phase. And the brainstorming phase is where you're just trying to get ideas for your paper, okay? And so I'm going to be explaining how to brainstorm in just a little bit. But in general, it's doing different strategies to get that idea for a topic, really here, multiple ideas for a topic. So you're listing things, you're thinking and planning, trying to get some kind of idea in your head. Once you have that, then we want to add in something called free writing. Free writing is where we, usually it's kind of a timed write. Maybe set a timer for 5 or 10 minutes, and you write in paragraph form, but without worrying about grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Okay, we don't care about that at this phase. You're just test driving your ideas. So let's say that in the brainstorming phase, you've got 3 different ideas for the essay that you're going to write. Okay, you will choose one of those. You'll set a timer for 10 minutes, and you'll write whatever comes into your head on that topic. So let's say that you're writing about how to become a chess grandmaster. Okay, and so you start writing about that paper topic, and 10 minutes is up, and you're like, okay, you know, I got like a page and a half here in 10 minutes. That's pretty good. I felt comfortable about that topic. Let me try one of my other topics. You set a timer for 10 minutes again, and you free write about maybe one of your other topics, which was, how to, how video games improve your hand-eye coordination, we'll say, okay? You start writing about that and you realize, I don't know a lot about this topic. In 10 minutes, I was only able to get about a half a page. I felt like as I was doing this, I was kind of, it took forever for me to get ideas, and it was just a really stressful process. Maybe that's not a paper that you want to write. Now, you have to do some self-reflection here. It could be that you just don't know much about that topic off the top of your head. Could be that you need to do some more research. That's a possibility, okay? So you don't want to immediately discount that idea. But if you've ever had that situation where you've gotten to a final draft and realized that you've got the wrong paper, free writing could have helped you with that, identifying that much earlier. So again, we're focusing on brainstorming this week, free writing next week. But let's kind of talk about how some of the rest of these work, okay? So the next part of the process is choosing a topic. So now you have done your brainstorming, you've done some free writing, you're kind of familiar with your topics a little bit. So now you say, okay, I'm going to be writing about this one. Now, I actually require you to do that in this class, and I require you to turn it in to me. And so I'll take a look at your topics, and I'll kind of assess, is this following the assignment guidelines? Is this going to be specific enough? Are you going to be able to write enough about this? Because I've done this a lot. I've studied what makes good topics, and so I can provide you some good feedback at this point. This stage is not something that you need to sweat and panic about. So when you see on your syllabus that, I need to turn in a topic for my paper, that's not something that I want you to worry about. That's something that I want you to embrace. Make sure you've done some good brainstorming and free writing, and think of it as, hey, Mr. Crank is my coach. He is going to, help me with this. The worst thing that could happen is he will say, you're not quite on the right track here for these reasons. Mess with it a little bit more and turn it back in. Okay, the grade that you get there, really the only way you can lose points on some of these assignments is to either A, not do them, or B, not do what I ask you to do with them. Okay, so I will never grade you down because your topic is bad. Okay, your topics won't be bad because I'll give you suggestions on them. But your topic is probably going to be good because you're following this process. You're doing some brainstorming, you're doing some free writing. You may have looked ahead at some of the assignments that we're doing, some of the big writing assignments. So you may already have an idea, and that's okay. So eventually, when we get to this stage where you choose a topic, that's a good thing. That's something we can work together on, right? Then you begin to do some initial research. Now, I think a better way to illustrate research, and maybe why I initially didn't put it on this list, is research kind of belongs out here. It's something that sometimes you do during the planning stage of the writing process. It's something you do before you write a thesis statement. It's something that you do while you're writing an outline, something that you return to while you're writing a draft. So you return to research often. But that's the whole point of this writing process that we were illustrating earlier, that it is a cyclical process. You move in and out, it's messy. You move in and out of all the different steps. And so it's not, even though I'm presenting it to you in kind of a linear fashion, it doesn't have to be that way. So you have not failed if you get to the draft stage and then have to go back and make an outline, or you have to go back and modify something. That's supposed to happen. Most of the time, when I am writing, so it's for me personally, when I'm writing a draft, most of the time, it looks completely different from the outline. And my thesis statement will change by the end, okay? So I spend a lot of time out here. Let me just walk you through my personal process. I have kind of maybe a general idea of what I want to go for, but I do spend some time planning. I take things to sometimes a written journal, sometimes a sketchbook, sometimes on my computer. I do some brainstorming. Sometimes I do some free writing exercises as well during this initial stage. And I get a couple of ideas,
And then I go and do some reading. I some initial research where I'll go out there and take a look at a couple of sources on my topic, think about them a little bit, and see, is this really the idea that I want to go with? What about this over here? What is this going to involve? And then I may even go and talk to somebody about it. I usually don't do that until later, but sometimes I go home and bug my wife about it, like, hey, I'm thinking about writing about this, and then, I'll do a little bit more writing, maybe some free writing at that point, but then I'll go immediately and start making a rough outline. And what I'm looking for is kind of, do I have a good thesis statement, and does that lend itself to a good outline? And then is that outline something that I feel like I do like it at this point? Is it going to make a good paper? Then I'll go back and do some more research and gather enough information. And if I need to tweak my thesis statement at that point, I will. So I'm blending in and out of this planning idea stage and outlining and research stage. Then I start writing the draft. And a lot of times I'll get stuck while I write it, because I realize and I'll do some research during this phase as well, I realize, my hypothesis was wrong. And so I've got to go back and change that. That requires some additional research. So I'll go back and plan and research a little bit. I may get so stuck that I have to change my outline and then go back and change that draft. And so it's really moving in and out of these. So remain flexible. Does that frustrate me when I have to do that? No, it does not. Okay, because I know that's supposed to happen. That's what you need to be doing. Okay. Now, some of you are really, really organized. Okay, Zach, the reason I asked you if you were a perfectionist was, from what you told me, that you kind of sound like one of those people who's going to be getting all the ideas in your head, and then when you put it down on paper, it seems like you've got it all together maybe much easier than the rest of us. So there are a few people out there, you may be one of them, try it out and see, where you do a lot of more of your planning up here. I'm still going to challenge you to use all these exercises. They will benefit you, but sometimes some of us who are a lot more analytical get a lot of our planning done up here and then put it down on paper, and it looks like, wow, how are you that perfect? It's not that you're perfect, it's that the rest of us we're more visual. I mean, we have to see it, we have to talk about it, we have to hear other people's ideas about it, and then we make it perfect. So we arrive at the same place, but we kind of have different methods of working. Does that make sense? Okay, so maybe that's true for you, maybe it's not. We'll see. But we move in and out of this process. Okay, so the whole point there was, this is not, even though I'm presenting it to you in a very linear fashion, you don't have to just do research here. I do not recommend that. We'll have a whole, I think 2 weeks dedicated to research, and so you hear me bring that up again later. Okay, I'm checking the chat here, just seeing if anybody has any questions or comments. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is exactly like designing a character. So, yeah, and it's really like designing anything. So I'm also teaching a creative writing class right now, and we go through the same process for creative writing. You go through the same process when you're doing set design for people who are involved in drama. Artists go through the same process of set design and set creation if they're drawing comics, which is something that I've done and I've studied a little bit, which is really fun to kind of brainstorm ideas for that. A lot of times comic book artists, which they are form I'm most familiar with, it's probably true for others as well, they'll spend a lot of time doing sketches and kind of manipulating the way things are organized within a frame, within a panel of the comic, until they get it the way they like it, and then they do the finished product. Okay, or if they're doing character designs, taking forever to go through and thinking of ideas for a character, trying on different costumes. I once, for one of my characters, drew his head, I think over 300 times to try to get it the way that I liked it. And then that wasn't even drawing then a finished panel. That was just to design the character. So you're absolutely right. That's exactly what this is like. So yeah, we're talking about it as the writing process, but you can apply it to a lot of different areas. If you have to do, I think you guys are going to be taking public speaking pretty soon, or maybe you're taking that right now. You can use this process for coming up with topics and preparing a speech. Okay, if you're going to be doing a drawing, it's very similar. It's just there's a few differences between the skills, but you're right, everything is a process. I'm really glad that you brought that up. You know what, guys, it would be really cool if you could look into our creative writing program. Sydney, you said that you really like creative writing. So I just started our creative writing program here. We've got a couple of classes running. That might be something interesting to look at in the future to see if you guys could pipe into some of those classes. So maybe I can talk to Mr. Bacon about that a little bit later, but we'd love to have you guys there. I'm also hoping to present or get student short stories and poems and nonfiction essays and artwork and things like that, and do a student publication. That is just in the, hey, wait for it, that is just in the early planning and brainstorming stages right now. Calvary University is just launching their Calvary University Press, and so I've been in just initial brainstorming talks with the director of the press saying, hey, would you be open to this? So if that comes around, I'll let you guys know about it. But yeah, we are launching that kind of thing. And thanks for your comment, Zach, about artwork. I will see if I can give you a link to that in our class resources. I do have a website that I will send you guys to probably for a few resources things. And I think I wrote, I'll put this on there. I wrote an article where I talked about using a journal to get ideas for stories. And as an example, I think I put a video of the 300 images of my character designs. And it's kind of a model of, you can do the same thing for your writing. So I'll give you a link to that. Okay, so let's move on here. Eventually you build a thesis statement. And if you've never done this before, don't worry about it. We'll talk more about thesis statements later. Again, this is just high level. A thesis statement, in essence, is one sentence that describes what your entire paper is about. And we build all of our essays around a central thesis statement. This is something that I recommend in all of your classes. Anytime that you're writing, even if it's reflective writing, you've got a thesis statement. The only time you don't do that is in a poem or in creative writing like a short story, okay? It would be really weird if you're writing a story about a knight facing a dragon and then you say, the reason that I'm writing this story is so that you understand the moral dilemma of knights who are fighting dragons and trying to rescue princesses. So that would be kind of dumb, so maybe don't do it there. But in your academic writing, we organize things around a thesis statement. Your thesis statement will be written in such a way that it creates an outline. I'll teach you kind of a 3-point thesis statement that will then help you build the outline. And if you don't have a good thesis statement, then building the outline is going to be a real pain, okay? So these work together. They scaffold on each other, right? But like I said before, you can move in and out between these. You can move back to research. You can move back to writing a thesis statement. You may have to go all the way back to the drawing board and get some more ideas. You can free write about them. All of that works. Your outline is not set in stone. Now, you will actually be required to submit number 5 and 6 to me. After you choose a topic and I say, yes, you're good to go, then a little bit later, and you can see the syllabus or Canvas for details on the due dates. A little bit later, you're actually going to have time to submit a thesis statement and an outline to me. Your thesis statement will be embedded into your outline. I'll give you a format for that. But again, just like I talked about before, this is time for you and me to kind of work on it together, and I'll see if you're on the right track. So you'll turn that in, and a lot of students realize when they get to the drafting phase that their outline needs to change or their whole topic will change. And so they'll come to me in a panic and they'll say, oh my gosh, I'm working on this essay, but it's totally different, and I don't know. Can I please change my topics? Of course you can. This is the writing process. It's messy, okay? So you do an outline so that you can be thinking, you're taking longer to think about your topic. Writing is simply clear thinking. So the more steps you put in your path to help you think through your writing, the better the final product will be. And so if you have to change your outline or change your topic completely, and when you're in the middle of a draft, you have not failed. You have realized that wasn't a good idea, or at least not right now. This is a good idea. You would not have arrived at that realization if you hadn't done that other work over there. Make sense? So, finally, you are in drafting phase. And in the drafting phase, you may find that, excuse me, you may find that you have to go back to these others, but finally you get the completed rough draft. And yay, what some people do here is they turn the paper in to their professors. Don't do that. Your draft is not something you turn in to your professor, unless they are specifically asking you to turn in a rough draft to give you feedback on it, okay? I don't allow you to do this in this class, but don't do that. So many people do that. That's why they lose points on assignments. They get an idea, they put it on paper, and they turn it in to their professor. Maybe they proofread it first. Maybe. But usually they turn in their rough draft. What does that do? Well, there's probably going to be some errors in it. It's not well thought out. And you may be an awesome writer, but it's not as well thought out as it could have been if you had spent more time on it. So your rough draft, yay, celebrate. That's a big chunk of your work done. But professional writers will tell you that the rough draft is not the hard part. It's one of the hard parts, but some of them say the real writing begins when you revise. That's the real part of writing. In fact, it was Aristotle that said that after you finish a rough draft, you should put it away for 7 years so you have time to think about other things and come back to it with fresh eyes. We don't have 7 years of time. But his point is that you even need to give yourself time away from your rough draft so you can come back to it, see it with new eyes, and make it better. But we often don't give ourselves that amount of time. Last week we talked about planning ahead. That's one reason you want to plan ahead, so that you don't have to turn in your rough draft. So don't turn in your rough draft. Get feedback on it. So during the rough draft stage, what you need to be doing once this is done is you need to turn your attention to revision. Revision literally means to see again. Vise, vision, see. Re means again, see again, okay? So you need to show your draft to other people. That's why we have a peer review in this class. You can send your papers through email to the academic coaches at the Clark Academic Center, and they can take a look at your papers for you. They will give you feedback on a number of different areas. They are, by definition, seeing your paper again because they're seeing it for the first time. They're using different eyes than yours. So they're going to give you different feedback that will help you. You're probably too close to your draft at this point, so you're going to want to not change anything. And other people are going to see things that you won't. Okay? So you need other people's suggestions. So during the revision process, you're focusing on high-level adjustments to the paper. Okay? We're going to go through a whole class period on this, but basically what that means is you're looking at, do I have enough research? If not, I need to go get more. Do I have things in the right order? Do I need to change the order of my paragraphs? Are my paragraphs well developed? Do I need to cut some things? Do I need to add some things? So these are big changes that take a lot of time. Marcus Zuzak is a famous author. He wrote The Book Thief. Okay, if you haven't read The Book Thief, it's fantastic. You should read it. But The Book Thief, he actually rewrote the entire thing 6 times. Rewrote his entire, imagine that, a book, okay? Easily 300 pages. I don't remember how long it is, but about 300 pages. He rewrote the entire, after his draft was done, he rewrote it 6 times. Why? Is he a moron? Was it horrible the first time? No. What he was trying to do was perfect the voice of the book. And if you've ever read that, the narrator of the book is a fascinating character. And it's really told from a fantastic perspective that really makes the book. But the first time he wrote it as a chronological narrative with just kind of a boring third-person narrator. The second time he wrote it, He took the main character and wrote it from her perspective. The third time he wrote it, he took the narrator out and changed things around. I don't remember all the different ways that he did, but like 6 different times. He rewrote the entire book. That's pretty common. So I think you could probably take 2 to 3 pages and make some big changes. I'm not asking you to rewrite 300 pages. I'm asking you to work on developing a really good draft of 2 to 3 pages. Doable, right? And you should be doing that for all of your papers. Really taking a look at how they are put together and making sure that you revise them for any problems. These are big things. This is not grammar, spelling, and punctuation. We start looking at grammar, spelling, and punctuation during the editing phase. The editing phase is where we're mostly focusing on style. We're looking at, how do I sound to my readers? Do I sound obnoxious, sarcastic, rude, arrogant? Do I sound too passionate? Do I not sound passionate enough? Am I boring? I wrote a paper one time for a high school English class. It was a really long paper that was worth 50% of my grade in the course, and it was a literary analysis on the book Moby Dick by Herman Melville. And so it was a really difficult paper. It really stretched me a lot. I turned it into my teacher, and when she handed it back to me, she said, "This is okay, but where was Thomas in this paper?" And I thought, I'm right here. My name's on the paper. I turned it in. I don't know what you mean. So I had to go back and just sit there with my draft and ponder her apocalyptic words to me that I had not put enough of myself into the paper. And then I started talking to one of my buddies who had written his paper with kind of a humorous perspective. He's a really funny guy, and he had kind of created this narrator that was based on some of the characters in Herman Melville's story, and that narrator was walking through the literary analysis. And I was like, whoa, I could be a little bit creative with this if I wanted. So I thought, well, who am I? How do I tell this paper but put a little bit more feeling in it? That is revision, and then getting into editing, like the tone that I'm using, the creative devices that I'm using, the stylistic language that I'm using, okay? And we have a day of our class designed to help us with that. So that moves from revision to editing, and then we get down to proofreading. Okay, proofreading is the line by line. I'm going to make sure that everything's perfect. I'm going to make sure my MLA formatting is perfect. I'm going to make sure that I have the correct spelling of my professor's name, of my name. Make sure you spell your own name correctly. All the words are spelled correctly. I've got all the commas in the right places. I've used a semicolon because I'm awesome like that. That's the final time that you get to take a look at this, and then you finally turn that in. So, for this class, I recommend what you do is you get to your draft after you've done those other steps that you turn into me. And at the very minimum, you've written one draft and you submit it to our peer review. Okay, that's required. After peer review, go ahead and get feedback from some other people too. You've got feedback from each other, get feedback from some other people too. Rework your paper, make it really, really awesome. At the very minimum, you should submit a second draft to me. It has to be significantly different from the first draft you submit to your peers. Okay? Then I give you feedback on it. I send it back to you with a grade. And we talked about this on day one. So you have that grade. Maybe you don't like that grade. Okay? Maybe that grade is a 65 or something like that. And you're like, whoa, I've never gotten a 65 in my life. Don't worry about the grade as much at this point. Worry about, what did Mr. Crank tell me that I can work on in this paper? And you revise, or perhaps edit and proofread a little bit, and get that score back up. Okay? And as we go, I'll tell you where students tend to miss more points on papers, and you can kind of keep that in your mind too as you go. But usually, people write about 2 to 3, sometimes 4 drafts before they get that grade that they want. Okay? So that may be the peer review draft, the draft that you turn into me the first time, the draft you turn into me a second time to get that grade that you want. Maybe another time. I have had a few students in the past that have put a ton of work into the class. They really wanted to improve their scores. They really wanted to get a lot out of the class, and they did like 6 drafts before the peer review. If you have that kind of time, you're welcome to do that. But I realize you're taking other classes, everybody's busy, you probably don't have that kind of time. But that particular student did. I've got one student in mind who's like, yeah, this is my draft 7 that I'm turning into peer review. And I was like, whoa, okay, I mean, great. You're applying what I'm asking you to. You probably don't need to be that much into it because you do need to do work for your other classes, and this takes time. But that's the right spirit, that you want to be following through all these different parts of the process. Okay, so let me pause here. Do you have any questions about the writing process? Now, obviously, I have not gone into a lot of detail on this yet. We're going to get there later. We're going to focus on brainstorming this week, free writing next week, and then we've got like a week or two for each of these other topics. But what questions are burning in your brain right now? Get those out onto the chat. Let me see questions that you have. This would also be the time to put in any questions that you have from that journal activity that I asked you to do. So I'm going to wait for a few minutes here. I would love to see some questions pop up here about the writing process or about something else in writing. I'd be happy to answer them now. So get those out of your brains, put them into the chat, and we'll talk about them here in just a couple minutes. Yeah, great question, Zach. Thanks for asking. So, Zach is asking, in the brainstorming section of the process, would writing initial ideas and subject be a good way of choosing ideas? Yes. So, what you're kind of doing at that step is you're like, I've got kind of an idea, like I want to talk about chess for this paper, here's kind of my general subject. That's your starting point. That's kind of like your rough draft idea. I had an art teacher in high school that was just like insane about never letting us do our first idea. Sometimes it was really annoying, okay? So I would say, I'm going to draw a picture of spaceships on a volcano. And he would say, okay, but let me see 25 sketches of it before you begin. And I want you to sketch other stuff too. And I'd be like, what, really? But what would inevitably happen is through that process of sketching different things, I would come to a better idea, or at least a better presentation of the idea. Sometimes it was the original, sometimes it was different. So you start there, Zach, with that idea, and when we get into brainstorming here in the second part of class, you'll see what I mean. But you leave it open-ended, and you just kind of follow all of these threads and see where you end up. You may come up with something stronger than that initial idea that's a better idea completely, or you may find a better way to say your initial idea. Brainstorming is like exploring. You know what you're looking for when you're exploring. You are not quite sure where the destination is. It's like, I just want to go and have fun out there. I don't really care where I end up as long as it's a great adventure. But eventually, you are going to find a destination that you want to be at, and you're going to go there and you're going to spend time at that destination. You're not just going to wander aimlessly forever. Eventually on this road trip, you are going to end up at a destination and have fun there. But at the beginning, you're just kind of exploring it. Now, I wouldn't recommend actually doing that as a road trip. That might be a little bit frustrating and spend a lot of money on gas, but for this, as an example, I think that works. And Sydney thinks, I see that you don't have any questions. That is totally fine. I'm just leaving it open-ended right now and seeing what you guys are thinking. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a break. Let's do a 10-minute break here. And then we're going to come back after 10 minutes and we're going to look at brainstorming specifically. So I'll see you guys in 10 minutes.
All right, so it has been 10 minutes, so we're going to start up here in just a second. So before the break, someone had asked about my drawings. I was poking around a little bit. It looks like I have not put up any recent stuff, but this is from 2011. These are some of the 300 pictures of that character's head that I was talking about, so if you're interested in that. But I think this is actually, when I was poking around, I found a post that I made in 2011 that was that I had done 300 pictures, but I think this was actually done after that, and so it may have been far more than 300. But anyway, like I said, that was back in 2011, and I do not have the newer stuff with me, which I was hoping to, because that reminded me of a couple of sketches that I used to have that I could show people that illustrates the writing process from a comics perspective, where I have an idea for a story that I then walk you through from the brainstorming planning phase all the way through to the actual finished final product. And I was poking around. I thought I had that document on my computer. I couldn't find it. But it would be worth taking a look at, because it kind of illustrates the messiness that goes into artwork and into writing. So maybe we can take a look at that another time. But anyway, this is that right there. But we're going to go ahead and transition ourselves into focusing on brainstorming itself. So we have just taken notes on the basic writing process. Now you need to prepare yourself and your journal, because we're going to jump into brainstorming. This is going to get kind of crazy today as we explore brainstorming together. You will probably need several pages set aside in your journal for our fifth journal entry. It's going to be messy. There's going to be a lot of stuff to be working on and working through. So just so that you're aware of that. What I'm going to do for you is I'm going to model what brainstorming looks like, and then I'm going to give you some exercises to work on with me, and that'll be journal entry number 5. Okay? So I'm going to talk about what it is and what it looks like, and then we're going to practice that together. And if you do have any questions that come up, please feel free to drop them into the chat. All right, so let me talk a little bit about brainstorming. So are you guys familiar with a game called 20 Questions? Have you ever played this game? It's a game where someone thinks of really anything. Maybe they're thinking about a monkey or a motorcycle or something like that. And then your job, the other people who are playing the game, their job is to try to figure out what that person's thinking by asking yes or no questions. Now, if you and I had gone to school together, back in high school or elementary school or something, you would have beaten me at this game every time, because I was horrible at 20 questions. Let's say that you were thinking about motorcycle. That was the object that you had chosen for this game. My questions would go something like this. Is it a mushroom? No? Okay. Is it a computer? It's a computer, right? Laptop computer. A Mac laptop? No? Okay. Is it a house? No. Is it is it grass? Okay. What's the problem with that? The problem is that I'm going to use up my 20 questions by randomly mentioning things, and how many things exist in the world. Like, if you're thinking of cyanobacteria, I'm never going to be able to get that with 20 questions. So a better way to play that game is by asking questions to narrow down categories, right? So maybe it would look like this. You're still thinking motorcycle. And so I might say, is it alive? And you would say no. Well, that cuts out a bunch of things that I don't have to think about anymore. Then maybe I say, okay, is it natural? And you say no, because a motorcycle is not a natural object. All right. And then I say, is it a machine? No, or yes, it is a machine. Okay. Is it a construction machine? I don't know. No, it's not. Is it a vehicle? Yes, it is. And so I narrow things down, so I'm using my questions more strategically, and that's where I finally get to where I can figure out that it is a motorcycle that you're thinking about. Okay? So if you've never played 20 questions, now you know how to play 20 questions and you can beat all of your friends. Also, cyanobacteria would be a fantastic thing to be thinking about. I bet no one would guess it. Also, nematodes. Look up what those are. Okay, so let's apply that to brainstorming. How is that related? Well, we typically try to brainstorm using the same method that I did, playing 20 questions the wrong way. We say, okay, brain, give me ideas for a story. Or you're given an assignment to write an essay. Okay, and you say, brain, give me ideas for this paper. And your brain's like, I don't know. I'm you. I don't have any ideas. I'm blocked. And if you're in writer's block at that stage, that's a hard place to be at. Have you ever been there before? You know what I'm talking about? Where you're staring at a blank page and you don't have any ideas. You have no idea what to write about. And your friend over there, he's already on his 5th draft that he's getting ready to turn into his teacher. And he's like, this is easy. And you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay? Instead of brainstorming that way, you want to brainstorm the way that you're supposed to play the 20 questions game. Instead of just giving your brain a general prompt, give me ideas for papers, your brain doesn't work that way. Your brain works by association. Okay, here's an example. Have you ever walked into a room and smelled something, and that smell triggered a memory, maybe a memory that you had forgotten about? That's association. Your brain smells that and brings up relevant memories. That's also kind of how Google works. You type in something to Google and Google will pull up as many things as it thinks is relevant to whatever it is that you typed in. And the more specific you can get it, the better content it's going to bring up in relation to whatever you typed. But your brain is much faster, much stronger, much better than that. So what you want to do is you want to take that scientific understanding of the brain and you want to use that in your brainstorming. So instead of just generally saying, give me ideas, what you're really doing is saying, brain, write the paper for me right now. What? That's like looking at a shovel and saying, I expect you to have dug this hole already. What's wrong with you? Really? You're going to talk to a shovel that way? Instead, give it something really specific to think about, like we did for 20 questions. We narrowed it down, didn't we? We said, okay, is it a machine? Is it alive? All right, we got really specific. So instead of saying, brain, give me ideas for a paper, why don't you try saying something like, brain, give me sad memories from my early childhood. Brain, give me happy memories from my early childhood. Brain, think about weird things that might live under the floor of buildings. And so where you spend your creative energy is on a prompt that brings that triggers your brain's association action. You want your brain to bring up lots of things because it will. It'll go from giving you like 2 or 3 ideas to giving you like 10 ideas if you do this. Okay, let me model this for you so you can see how it works, okay? I am going to pull up a blank document here. Called brainstorming example. Increase the font just a little bit. Okay, so what if I said sad memories from my childhood? Okay,
what my brain is going to do is it's going to start bringing up things that match that query. Okay, maybe I can think of 4, 5, 6 different things that are going to come into my head. All right, but now look at this prompt. We can customize this, can't we? Instead of sad, we could say happy. We could put any emotion in here. So what if we just left that blank? And, you know, memories is fine. We can leave that for now. But from we could change that, right? Instead of childhood, we could say from my first job. Maybe you have a job now, maybe not. Maybe that'll be later in your future. But you can sequence this any way that you want. Memories from 4th grade. Memories from 5th grade. Memories from middle school. Memories from my homeschool group. Memories from CUA, you know, my Calvary University Academy time period. Memories from living in Colorado. Memories from any of you not born in Colorado, maybe you lived in a different state previously. Memories from that previous state before I moved here, okay? So we can put a blank there as well. So really, by doing this, you've given yourself a brainstorming template. And let's say on the first emotion that you do, like sad memories from my childhood, you come up with 5 different ideas. And then you switch out sad to a different emotion, and you get 5 more ideas. You switch that out again, and you get 5 more ideas. You switch out childhood to a different time period, and you get 5 more ideas, or maybe 2 ideas, or 3 ideas. But do you get the idea that as you stack different things into this template, you're not doing a lot of creative, really hard work here, are you? You're using the tool God has given you, this incredibly creative brain that works on association, to just massively pour a ton of different ideas onto the page. Okay? When you first do this, it might feel a little bit slow. It might be hard to kind of get some ideas down there. But do you see how by changing out a few things, that's not hard work to change. You can use this same prompt that I've given you right here, okay? I'm sorry, my computer's over there that I'm pointing to. I don't know if you can kind of see it on the camera, okay? You've got those ideas right there, that prompt. You can lift that, you can use that for your papers to give you ideas, and really what you're doing is you're just tweaking the adjectives like sad, happy, etc., and then you're switching the time period. Okay, now let's go back and let's look at how else you can use this. What if you then said whatever memories from, and then instead of a time period, what if you did places, right? You could do it that way too. What if you did people? Sad memories related to my grandma. Happy memories related to my grandma. Okay? You could also take this, let's see, how else could we divvy this up? We got time period, we've got place, we've got people. We could even have maybe it could be that your testimony could come into this. Maybe you've got certain memories from before you were saved and after you were saved that could fit in this as well. So maybe your place in life, so that's a little bit more abstract. And you could even combine these time periods and places. Maybe you've gone to Disney World at different times and you have different memories from that. Okay, so this is just one template that you can use, and this is going to give you several ideas. Now, you may be wondering at this point, like, how could this help me? So let me give you a couple of ways that you can use this. So how can I use this to give me ideas for assignments? That's kind of the question here, because great, I can come up with a lot of ideas, but if I can't actually use those on assignments, what's the point, right? I hear you. Okay, not literally, but you know, I think I hear you. So how can I use this to give me ideas for assignments? Well, memories, let me make a list here. Memories can be the basis for short fiction stories. So if you're given an assignment where you have to write a short story, you could base it on your real life. So maybe your teacher says, okay, I want you to write a scary story. So you say, okay, have I had anything scary happen to me? And then I'm going to use that as an idea. And I'm going to fictionalize it a little bit. Maybe instead of being scared by a squirrel, maybe I'm an astronaut on a foreign planet and I'm being scared by an alien squirrel. Okay, why not? So use your own life as inspiration. If you're required to do a reflective assignment, this fits perfectly. I hope that's obvious. Like if you're required to write a story about your life that taught you a lesson, that's a very common writing assignment for freshmen in college. I used to give that assignment in this class, but I took that out because we're doing different types of writing. But this would obviously be very easy for that. You could also do this for poem because your feelings make for great poems. Okay? And what writers will typically do is they will take their feelings about a topic and it starts with them, but obviously you need to find a way to connect to your audience because frankly your audience doesn't really care about you until you make you applicable to them, right? So you start with your ideas, but then you use that poem to kind of influence them or use that story to influence them. So that's kind of how you can use it here. But what about in this class? Like in this class, you're going to be writing an informative essay and a persuasive essay. So how do you take this and turn it into that? Okay, well, let me just illustrate. Excuse me. Had to get a little bit of water. Let me illustrate this for you by using a real example, okay? Let's say that my prompt was take and copy this here. Let's say funny memories from Burger King. Right? So for me, one of my first official jobs was working at a Burger King, which is actually just like 2 miles down the road from where I'm teaching right now, which is kind of fun. So I used to work there back when I was in high school. I was a junior and senior, I think. So if this was my prompt, my brainstorming might look a little bit like this. Okay, so funny memories from Burger King. Well, big truck hits the roof. Milkshake lady run in with homeless guy. Pranks with what are those things called? Headsets. These are real things that I'm writing down. These are real memories that I have from my brain that relate to this. Okay, so I've come up with 4 ideas right now. I could keep going, but these are some. I could switch out the memory. I could do sad. I could do angry or whatever. But these are the ones I've come up with. Now, I love the milkshake story. This is one of my favorites to write about. So I'm going to highlight this one. Notice this probably doesn't make any sense to you. Your brainstorming will probably not make any sense to anybody. And that's okay. You don't have to turn in your brainstorming. You don't have to explain to your, you don't have to try to make it make sense to anybody. This is for you. This is your brainstorming, okay? I put just a few phrases, few words on here. You don't even have to spell things right. Okay, this is informal. You're just trying to get ideas, right? So milkshake lady. Well, what does that mean? Let me actually tell you the story so you know what I'm talking about, and then I'll tell you how I could use this because now you'll be in my head, right? Then I can tell you how I can use this for basically anything that I want. So in short, the story is basically this. I'm working on a very busy Saturday at Burger King, and my favorite place to work there was in the drive-thru. So I would be taking orders in the drive-thru, and then I'd have a couple people helping me there. Some of them would be, of course, making the food. Some of them would be packaging the food. And then there was someone back in the back taking money, and someone whose job was to hand the food to the customer. So it's a lot of teamwork, and we're under a lot of pressure because we are trying to make a certain average drive-through time. We want our customer experience to be about 2.5 minutes from the time they pull up to the time they leave with their food. And that's pretty difficult, especially when you're really busy. And today was one of those really bad days where it was extremely busy, and I happened to look up on the camera that I could see outside and see where the cars were, and we had both of our drive-through lanes completely full, and it was actually wrapped around the building and went out into the street into a busy intersection. We had that many cars. So it was an extremely busy weekend, the busiest that I had ever seen it. So we were all stressed and trying to go as fast as we could, working together. I had worked with these people a number of times, so we knew each other pretty well. I was working with my friend Sarah. My friend Sarah only had the use of one of her hands. There was a surgery early on in her life where they had to remove one of her hands because of an illness that she had. So she only had one hand, but she could move pretty quick even with that. But sometimes it took her a little bit longer, and it really pained me when I would see customers that did not treat her very well as a result of that. That maybe she was too slow for what they wanted, and so they would treat her poorly. So that's a little bit of the background. And I happened to notice that there was a lady who was sitting outside of my drive-through window for a very long time. And so I was taking some orders, and then it got to the point where the line was so backed up that I literally couldn't take any more orders because there was nobody else there. This lady had still been in our lane. I think she was there for a total of 10 minutes. So you can imagine how mad she was. And sure enough, I look out the window, she's in this very big van, and she has a bunch of kids in the back. The kids in the back are screaming. In fact, one of the kids is standing up out of his seat right behind the driver's seat, and he's held the back of the headboard of his mother's chair, and he's shaking it and screaming at the top of his lungs. So you can imagine how that lady must be feeling at this point as well. So I'm also noticing that something is wrong. Like we keep handing her, my friend Sarah with the one hand keeps handing things out the window, and the lady's mad and is yelling at her for something. And so having had a little bit more experience there, I decided I'm going to kind of take over this situation and see if we can kind of get things moving. And so some of my friends, Sarah tells me that, hey, the milkshakes aren't right. And so I open up the window to talk to the lady to see what's going on. I say, hi, ma'am, and I have to dodge a milkshake. She literally picks up a milkshake and throws it into the drive-through window directly at me. It goes, I dodge out of the way, right? This thing goes careening into the Burger King window, lands on our counter, and splatters everywhere. And I'm like, okay. So in a real nice voice, I said, oh, okay, ma'am, there's a problem with your milkshake. What seems to be the problem? And through all of the profanity and screaming of the kids, I realized that it should have been vanilla instead of chocolate. So we got that figured out. And I hand that in and have to, the entire time I work with her, dodge missiles of all types. French fries, other milkshakes. Finally, we get her all the right food, which actually was right to begin with, but the customer's always right. And we get her out of the drive-through window. And what I learned through that situation was that patience does really pay off, but sometimes you have to dodge food. So that's the milkshake lady story. Now that you're in my head, let's see how we can apply that to this situation right here. Okay, so if I want to turn that into a short fiction story, well, let's start easy. Let's say that I have to write a story that taught me a lesson. Well, I just told you what the lesson was. The lesson was that, patience is great, but, sometimes it still does have consequences. Like, I can talk as nicely as I want to someone, but maybe I still have to dodge milkshakes. Or I could take that a different way, and I could have all kinds of different lessons that I use. So that's for one assignment. I could take it and I can fictionalize that. Okay, I could turn it into a short story. Maybe it's a space story. Okay, maybe it's a medieval story. I could change the setting, the time period. Maybe I could turn this into a poem. You know, as she hurled milkshakes across the room, it was my sudden doom. You know, okay, that's horrible. Anyway, so I could turn it into a poem. But now, what about an informative essay? What about a persuasive essay? So here's what I would do. After I get some ideas here, I then take it back to what is my assignment, okay? Well, my assignment in this example is an informative essay. So how can I take this idea that I like and turn it into an informative essay? Now, I'm not going to answer that question right now. Surprise, I'm going to throw it at you. How could, you know my story now, how could I use that as an informative essay? Tell me in the chat. How can I use this as an informative essay? Do you have any ideas? And Zach, thanks for bringing up Inktober. I've never heard of that before, but that's pretty neat. Anyone can do Inktober. Just pick up a pen and start drawing. Do one ink drawing every day for the entire month of October. Man, where was that when I was doing more ink drawing? I love ink drawings. That's cool. I'll have to look more into that a little bit later. Maybe, okay, so Zach says maybe you could inform on how to stay calm in that specific situation. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm going to add that to my list. The rest of you post as soon as you can, and I'll add these to the list here. So, let's see. How to stay calm at fast food restaurants. Okay, so if you're in any kind of fast food situations, this is a how-to paper in inviting people to also learn how to stay calm. Sydney says you can inform people to have patience in certain situations. Yeah, so you could take that a couple of different ways. It could be the importance of staying patient in situations. So that may be one way that I could take what you're saying there. It could be similar to what Zach said earlier. Or it could be, I mean, I don't know if this is the way that you're going with it too, Sydney, but I just had this idea. It could be illustrating what the Bible says about patience, right? And you could do that in all the papers, but you could have one that is focused purely on what the Bible says, and then illustrate it, almost like a sermon illustration or something. Good. And Josh, one lesson with patience is also to pay attention. Don't just blank slate. Yeah, that's important, and that brings up an interesting question. There's a lot of unknowns that I have in that situation. Like, how was she there for 10 minutes? You know, what was all wrong with the order? I came in kind of at the end, so you know, paying attention to that situation could have been helpful. Like, how to pay attention during stressful situations, maybe. Because sometimes what happens is we lose that attention to detail the more stress there is. And so it could have been that someone could have solved the problem before I got there. So, all right, good. So that makes sense. What about argumentative? Well, sometimes it's easy to take one of these informative assignments or ideas, and then you can actually tweak it slightly to make it persuasive. So instead of how to stay calm at fast food restaurants, you can actually flip that and say, fast food workers should always remain calm at fast food restaurants. Or you could flip it again and say something like this. well, let me create a new section that's argumentative. Though the customer is always right is a common statement. Fast food workers here. When the customer is wrong, they need to stand up for themselves. Okay? So that's kind of controversial. There's a lot of people who would disagree with that statement. My bosses at Burger King would disagree with that statement. I'm not necessarily saying one way or the other that this is correct. I'm just using it as an example. So maybe it's okay to not remain calm. Maybe we could say, since, let's see here, other things that we could do is we could say, everyone should work in fast food restaurants before graduating college to learn patience. Okay, do you see how this works? We could keep brainstorming here. And by the way, what we're doing as we are writing these informative ideas and persuasive ideas, we're still brainstorming. But now we've got our bank of material, which is up here. Milkshake lady, truck hits roof, all that stuff. And now we're pulling from that. We're saying, I like this idea, I like this idea. How do I fit it towards my assignment? And I'm going to brainstorm different topic ideas now. And my brain is still working on association because I'm pulling from something tangible. I'm not pulling from nothing and trying to create an idea from scratch. I'm now pulling from something, I'm tweaking and molding. Okay? So you have to write an informative paper and you have to write a persuasive paper. You can actually use the brainstorming activities that we're going to do right here in just a couple minutes for both papers. You could take some of the same ideas and you can use them for two different types of assignments. So if I loved this milkshake lady story, I could write about that as an informative paper, then I could flip it and I can write it as a persuasive paper. Okay? I've had people do that. I'm trying to think of an example. I think someone, I know they were thinking about doing this. I don't remember if they actually did or not, but someone was saying last semester said, I want to write about the dangers of pornography. Just in general, I want to be informing people because he had a ministry with some of his friends that weren't saved, and he wanted to do some research and to inform them. He had a real specific reason he wanted to do that. And then his second paper in the class was, now I'm going to persuade people that they should not take part in it. So the first one is just merely informative. Second one now is, I want you to take this, I want you to do these things or not do these things. It was very persuasive, okay? Does that kind of make sense? So that's the power of brainstorming. We go really specific with a template, okay? The template like this up here, one that's not going to take us a lot of work to use, that we can get lots of ideas from, and then we take those ideas and say, what would this look like as my assignment? All right, does that process make sense? If you have any questions, now's the time to drop them into the chat. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some different templates you can use. Okay? So not just memories from these different places, you can actually do some other activities to get ideas. So here's some other templates. By the way, if you're not writing these down, this would be a good thing to do. I will provide these, a lot of my notes, but since sometimes I create notes in class like I'm doing right now, I won't always remember to post those later, or I'm teaching different sections of the class, so it's just a good thing to take notes just in case those aren't available to you later, but I do try to post everything. So other brainstorming templates, things that annoy me. my hobbies. Your hobbies are like an endless topic generating idea. Okay, so whatever your hobbies are, I mean, you don't even have to list them because you know your hobbies. But you could turn them into informative ideas. You can turn them into persuasive ideas. Using your hobbies as short story ideas is always really cool. There's a lot of people that have become really famous writers started by just writing about things that they enjoyed. Like John Grisham is a crime novelist who writes crime novels based on law because he has a background in law, and he was like, this would be cool. And so now he's a really popular writer, okay? So things that annoy me, my hobbies, current events. Now, if you use current events, you'll want to do a little bit of research for this one, probably, especially if you're not really well informed on what's going out there in the world. But then you want to make this one specific a little bit. So you can make it specific by looking at maybe a specific country, maybe a specific topic, like current abortion events. Current abortion events in the United States. Current immigration concerns in the United States, right? So you've got a topic and a country to nail it down, but current events is fantastic. Controversial topics. Right, so you'll probably be able to come up with a bunch of them just right off the top of your head. Those can make for great informative assignments and persuasive assignments, just like I told you a second ago with pornography. One thing that's actually debated a lot is in our culture, and has been for the last 100 years actually, is whether or not pornography is an art form. So legally, like the Supreme Court has had cases on this a number of times. Is it art? Is it something else? Because they're trying to make laws to protect children, and some of the companies are like, oh no, it's really art. So it's not. We don't have to protect children from this. So you can see how sin just influences that. Same thing with abortion. We've been debating that for a very long time. That's a controversial topic. You can inform people about it, merely saying, hey, here's some of the science behind abortion, or you can make the argument. You got to watch out for controversial topics, though, because they are common, all right? And because they're controversial, that means it's something that everybody's talking and debating, and so it's hard to explain these topics, to write about these topics in a way that your professor has never seen it done before. And so you got to think, one of your audience members is your professor. And so if you've chosen a really common topic, the odds are your professor has seen dozens of those papers, okay? I've been teaching for 12 years, and actually maybe 14 years now, I forget. I've been teaching for a while, and I've been teaching this class for a while, and I've had students write on abortion every single year. And so the odds of you coming at it uniquely is going to be pretty tough to come up with something. So what that does is when I see an abortion paper, automatically in my mind I'm like, oh, another abortion paper that's going to say the same thing as everything else. Okay? When you're writing, your goal is to try to add something to the conversation, not just rehash what other people have said, right? And so it's really hard to do that with some of these. Now, I'm not telling you can't write about abortion, but I will challenge you to find some unique way to go about it. Now, I'm not sure whether or not you guys have seen any, or if you're watching any of our chapel videos from Calvary University, but on Monday, I did a chapel presentation here, and I had that very situation in front of me. I knew I wanted to talk about theistic evolution because that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. But I wanted to come at it from a unique angle that my audience may have not heard before, because evolution, creation is debated constantly. And so I wanted to make an argument against theistic evolution, the idea that God could have used evolution to create. I wanted to say, no, that's not true according to the Bible. But I wanted to present it in a unique way. So I did some brainstorming, thought for a long time, and I said, okay, I'm an English nut, so why not take it from that route? So what I settled on was the literary failures of theistic evolution. And I did some initial research, and I didn't see a lot of people who have made this argument before. Someone has probably talked about that somewhere along the lines, but in my initial research, I hadn't found that. And so I presented on story structure and taught our audience story structure, and then applied it to the narrative in Genesis and showed how if you put theistic evolution into Genesis, you destroy the story structure. And some of the professors afterwards told me, wow, we hadn't really heard it from that perspective. So it generated some conversation. As a writer, that's your responsibility. That's what you're trying to do. So if you take a controversial topic, that is much harder. It's not impossible. I just illustrated that for you. But your job is to make it just a little bit different, not rehash what everybody else has said, because they said it, right? So why would you re-say something that other people have said? You use what other people have said to continue the conversation. Now, I'm going to teach you more about how to do that later, but right now, it would not hurt to write down controversial topics. So I'm just giving you a warning here. I'm not trying to scare you, just trying to give you a warning about those controversial topics. You could go on endlessly with these brainstorming templates. I hope you're seeing how you could be, I want you to be able to see how you can use this brainstorming technique to just like unlock an explosion of ideas. I want to leave you with this before we do our activity, okay? And that's that famous authors, if you look at what they've said, they will tell you that coming up with ideas is easy for them. Now, for writers who are just starting, sometimes that's the hard part, but it doesn't remain hard very long because they soon discover that anything can be a source of inspiration. If you look around your room at the objects in your room or in your classroom right now, you can use something there that you see as an idea for a paper, okay? I don't know what your desks are like there, but someone at some point designed that desk, and they designed that desk to solve a certain problem. That's inherently persuasive. So someone came along and was like, you know what? These chairs are dumb because they don't have a place for us to write. Like, we have to have a hard surface that we provide ourselves. So I'm going to have a little thing that folds down on my chair, and I'm going to call it a desk. And that's going to have a surface for someone to write on. And someone else said, you know what would be even cooler is I'm going to put something where we can store books and materials inside the desk. Have you ever had a desk like that, maybe in school or something, or maybe you have those there that have kind of the desktop drawer on it, you know? So these different products, these are ideas that people have had based on what they're seeing around them, and they're trying to solve problems. That's a persuasive process. Or maybe someone does an informative presentation on ergonomics, like how does a person's body fit within a chair or comfortably in a way that's not going to damage their spine, and they realize the chairs that we have here most of the time are actually doing damage to our spine. So I'm going to make an argument for a better chair design, and I'm going to present that to people, okay, and make a new chair. So this is just how you can use stuff that is in your room or anywhere, anything, to give you ideas for papers. And I'm seeing some things come through the chat here, so let's take a look at this here. Okay, so yeah, so some of you have seen the chapel. So Josh, is that something that annoys you? Zach was eating cheese and didn't seal the bag, so now the whole room smells like cheese. You do have drawers in your desks. Heh, I didn't even know that. Neato. So yeah, you can put stuff there. Okay, so anything can be an idea. So hopefully I've convinced you of the power of brainstorming. What we're going to do for the remainder of our class is we're going to illustrate this with a pocket dimension in our desks. Now, what I'm thinking of is like a dimensional rift where you can store stuff in infinite space in a parallel universe. Is that what you're talking about, Zach? I'm probably misinterpreting you. I don't know. But that would be cool too if we could invent that. So let's get ready. Get your journals out here. We're going to do some brainstorming tasks. This is a pretty straightforward prompt that is kind of a live prompt. Journal entry number 5, brainstorming practice. You're probably going to need multiple pieces of paper for this. We'll see how it goes. Oh, a fantasy story. I gotcha. Yeah, interesting lunchbox. Okay, so journal entry number 5, brainstorming practice. Again, make sure that you title this, make sure you've got the number there, and of course the date. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through live on brainstorming. And I always get excited about this lesson because we never know where we're going to end up. What we're going to do is we're going to experiment with these templates. We're going to use some of the ones we just created, and we're going to create a library of ideas in your journal. Keep this. You can use it on both of your big papers. I just showed you how to do that. So this can be something you can draw from, all right? So let's start off with, let's be positive. So let's do funny stories from your childhood. Now, for some of these, you might have nothing. That's okay, just sit tight. I'm not going to give you much time on each of these. Jot down real quickly anything that comes into your head, funny memories from childhood. Go. Now, recent funny memories. So, not just childhood, but something that's happened to you recently. Maybe happened to you today. Now let's look at other people. Write down memories, funny things that you've seen other people do. This does not, so go wide here. TV shows, books, movies, just observing people in your town, your friends, your family. Did your brother fall down the stairs recently and survive in a funny way? Write that down. Anything funny from anyone, write it down. Okay, now here's one to think about. And by the way, if I cut you off in the middle of doing a brainstorming prompt, give yourself a little bit of space there. You can always return back to it later. You can add to these lists at any time. We're just getting you started. I'm going to go through lots and lots and lots of prompts with you, just to two things: to model what you do in brainstorming and to help you get ideas for your papers. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. What I want you to do is I want you to write down challenges you have faced in your life. Challenges you have faced, no matter how big or small. Challenges you have faced in your life. If you're having trouble coming up with ideas, segment it by time period. Challenges from childhood. Maybe you have a challenging birth story. Maybe your parents have told you, like, you were actually, when you were born, the doctors had to, do some crazy procedures to get you to breathe on your own or something. That would count here too. Challenges. So it doesn't have to be a memory that you have, but a memory someone has told you about. Okay. Early childhood, middle school, high school challenges you've faced? Forgot to mention this a moment ago, but and it's okay if you haven't done this yet, but I would keep these in separate lists. So maybe have your paper split up into like 3 or 4 different columns so you can be organized here, so you know what these lists are. Because if you come back to this when we start working on paper 2 during like week 9 or something, you may not remember what these are. So in some way, maybe write down the prompt, or in some way organize these so you kind of know, you'll be able to know what we're talking about. So far we've done funny memories and challenges that you've had in your life, I think. Okay, now let's do things that annoy you. Things that annoy you. We'll start general, and then I'll give you some more specific ones here. So what annoys you? If you write down English professors, I'm going to be angry. No, not really. Let's get a tad more specific now. What about things that annoy you about school? Some people have created some really innovative products, ideas, and even laws and policies related to this question. You know, well, stuff never fits in my locker. I don't have enough space, and so they've created these different locker shelves. So, you know, this is a good place to kind of to camp out a little bit. What annoys you about school? What annoys you about our world and our country? What are some things that you want to learn more about? Topics that you've always wanted to figure out but just have never made the time. Like, I've always wanted to learn more about the deepest place on Earth, the Marianas Trench. So these could be places, things, hobbies, historical events. I've also always wanted to learn more about the mysterious vanishing colony of Roanoke Island. One of the first attempts at colonization in the New World, colony at Roanoke disappeared. What are some things that you want to know more about? Write them down. Now, what would be some things that you want to know more about biblical topics? So, for example, I want to know more about the events of Revelation. I've never understood that before. Or I want to know the difference between Reformed and dispensational theology. Like, what's with that? So write those down. Things that you want to know more about the Bible. And again, if you're having trouble writing things down at this stage, that's okay. It would help to do just a little bit of research, look at some things, look at some lists, and then that'll probably trigger some things. So you can do that later. Try to get some ideas down, things that you want to learn more about the Bible. Okay, now let's go ahead and pause there. Real quick, count up how many things total you've listed and put the number in the chat. I'm just curious. How many different things have you listed? I think I've given you like 5 different prompts now. How many things do you have on your list? So this is not a contest, by the way. It doesn't really matter how many you have. I'm just curious. Put that number down. Thank you, Sydney. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Zach. Great. Okay. So, how many of you think that you have at least one idea that you could use for a paper topic? Put yes if that's you. Put no if you don't think you have an idea that you could use for a paper. Great, guys, that's fantastic. Just curious, how many of you had an idea? How do I want to word this? Is your idea the same as it was at the beginning of this classroom? So maybe you had an idea going in here. Is your idea the same, or did you find something better? Yes or no? Okay. Thanks, guys. Great feedback. So, using this process, you can come up with a lot of ideas really rapidly. You may discover in the process that your idea doesn't change, and so it's good to have explored other options. You may find that your idea is now stronger. You may find that, man, I came up with an idea that I never would have thought of before. We can add one other process in here. We're not actually going to do this together, because I want to talk about something else here at the end. But something else you can do here is you can go and just kind of browse the internet and look at a couple of these different topics, read about it a little bit. It doesn't matter how scholarly the website is at this point, so if you go on Wikipedia or watch a YouTube video or something like that, you're just kind of feeling out the topic. So if you want to write about recycling and you read a little bit about recycling, you're like, oh, I actually don't like this after all, maybe that's not the topic for you. And so research can actually help you in the choosing a topic part of this. Hey, so now what we're going to do is we're going to transition here, and we're going to go to our Canvas page, and I'm going to talk to you about your first essay and kind of make you aware of a couple of things that are happening. Okay. Any questions that you have, of course, you're welcome to throw them into the chat at this point too. So here we are on our Canvas page. I'm going to click on the Modules tab, and I'm going to minimize week 1 here because we're in week 2. Make sure that you do your reading summary for this week. It's usually, it would be a good idea, I don't require this, but since this class falls on a Wednesday, it's probably a good idea to finish up your reading before class. I will not always cover the reading that we're doing that week in class. Sometimes I will. For Chapter 1's reading, I will probably come back to it in a later week where we go through reading critically, strategies, things like that, because Chapter 1 refers to a lot of that. But it may help you to have read before class, just in case I go over that material. You'll kind of know when that is based on the topic that we're talking about. So if that chapter has a lot to do with the topic that we're going to be discussing that week, then definitely have read through it. If it isn't quite that way, then it's probably not as important. But you'll notice I've got Essay 1 guidelines posted here, so it is time to take a look at it. You don't have anything due until the 21st of September. That's your Essay 1 topic. But it is a good thing right now for us to go ahead and take a look at the Essay 1 guidelines. Maybe you already have, but either way, I'm going to go through it here. It is an informative research report. What you're going to do is choose a topic, perform scholarly research, discover interesting information, and present the results of your research in a well-organized essay. Here's what you should be doing here. You need to fill 2 to 3 pages, double-spaced, plus a reference list. This is called a works cited page in MLA, but we'll go over that a little bit more here at another time. Begin with an interesting introduction. Present a clear 3-point thesis statement at the end of the first paragraph. Develop a main point over 3 body paragraphs that follow the model provided in class. What model? Well, that's a topic for another day, and so that's coming up. Don't worry, I'll teach you all of this. We actually have class time dedicated to all of these things here, but we'll get to that. Cite from at least 3 scholarly sources, and I say at least twice each. That will make more sense when we go over the 5-paragraph model, by the way. And citation should be no longer than 2 lines. I'm being extremely specific here, and I'm doing that not to be mean, but because I'm taking things that your professors care about, and I'm kind of forcing you to do them so you can get in the habit of doing them. I actually pulled this idea. This is a change this year. I pulled this directly from a conversation that I had with a couple of professors, because as a writing teacher, I will often ask professors, what things annoy you about student writing? I do that not as a way to be negative about students, but to hear from them things that annoy them about papers, so I know what kinds of things I should be teaching you guys specific to this university. And one of the things that I discovered is that a lot of students will quote just kind of at random from their sources, and their sources will be too long. They'll be quoting too much. And your professors want to see your ideas. So I'll teach you how to do that in this class. And with an interesting introduction. Make sure that your paper is formatted in MLA, that you have in-text citations, and make sure that you have a works cited page. All right, so you've got all of those different pieces. So what's your process? How do you do this? Well, guess what? You use the writing process, and I've kind of outlined that for you here. You're going to understand the 5-paragraph model, which I'm going to go over in a couple of weeks. Review the videos and notes as needed. So first is pay attention in class and do the reading. Then read and understand the assignment and example materials. So make sure you actually know what you're being asked to do. Don't write a persuasive essay. I'm asking you to write an informative essay. Brainstorm, hey, look at that. You know what that is. Free write, that's next week. And conduct initial research to select a topic. And then you'll turn in the topic to me. Form a research question. I will talk about that at another time. That will lead you eventually to a thesis statement. Find sources. Read the sources and take notes. Write a thesis and outline. Write a rough draft. Get feedback and revise. Edit and proofread. Okay? this is the writing process, except that I've added a couple of steps here that are more specific. So these right in here: form a research question, find sources, read sources, and take notes. We're going to go over that during some other class periods. Okay, so don't worry about that right now. Okay, I have provided resources for you here. One is on the research process if you want to read ahead on that. I'm not sure how much the notes will make sense since I haven't given you the lecture on the research process yet, but those are available if you want to take a look at them. And then here's an example. This is a student example of an informative essay. We'll go ahead and open that one up and take a look at it real quick. This example, unfortunately, was the rough draft, so there's a number of things in this essay that are not awesome. And you should also know that this was in a different format. This is not MLA format, okay? So I'm showing this to you as an example of a student essay, not because it's the best example of a student essay. It used to be that the Calvary University used only one style guide. We all used Turabian. Now we're switching to MLA for English classes. Sometimes you'll write in APA, sometimes you'll write in Turabian, so you probably have to know a couple different style guides. But what you're kind of doing is you use the example paper to kind of give you an idea about what it kind of looks like. Not like I'm going to do whatever this person did and make it look exactly like that, because it's not the greatest example in the world. But it is an interesting topic. This student actually wrote about her hobby, which was horses. Breeding horses, training horses, like anything horse, she was all about that. She absolutely loved horses, and so she's writing this informative essay about basically where these different breeds came from historically. So maybe that would give you some inspiration for something that you're interested in writing about. What are scholarly sources you could use? Well, books are great scholarly sources. Peer-reviewed journals, I'm going to explain that in class. News articles from mainstream media. You still need to fact check those, but those are scholarly. And some websites and magazines, which of course I will approve if there are any questionable ones. But we're gonna spend more time talking about scholarly sources. It's kind of too early to really worry about that. What you need to be thinking about right now is my job is to choose a topic that I can provide interesting information about to my classmates. Okay, so whatever that is, if you chose your hobby or something that annoys you or something you discovered in class today that you want to learn more about, whatever that thing is, your job then over the next several weeks is to do the research and develop an essay that's well organized that can present that information to the class. Okay, so I'm going to pause for just a couple minutes here. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop those into the chat. I would love to hear them. I'll wait for just a couple minutes here. Any questions? Thanks, Josh. When making references, can you write the paper first? Good question. So when you're using scholarly sources, what you're going to want to do is keep track of the sources that you're going to be using as you're finding them. I'm going to show you how to do that, but I like to keep all of mine in a document so that I can easily find them again if I need to. And then I do cite things as I go. Those are called in-text citations. And I don't worry about the formal works cited page until the very end. but I do keep track of, what are my sources, and I make sure that I cite them while I'm writing the paper. But I'm not too worried about formatting, because if I worry too much about that stuff immediately as I'm drafting, it can slow down my drafting process. So it's important that you don't go to one extreme, which is I'm not going to cite anything, and then you forget, and then it takes a long time and it's really tedious. But you don't want to go to the other extreme either, which is, I'm going to do everything and be really tedious up front, and then it slows down your drafting process, and you you forget some of the ideas that you had that were really good. So does that kind of make sense? And then, make reference, can you write the paper first and then add them? Yes, so you can do it that way, but I would strongly suggest that somewhere you have a list of the sources that you're going to use. That's just a good organizational practice, and you can do it easier at this level because you're only using, I think I'm requiring 3 sources, but a lot of the papers that I'm writing right now, and that some of the people in our graduate program write, and even some of the papers that are written at a higher level at the college, the undergrad, require many more sources. So some of my papers, I'm easily citing 50 different types of sources. And if I don't have an organized system, it's impossible to keep them all straight. And so there's a tool that I use that's called an annotated bibliography. I'll talk a little bit about in this class. And I recommend you kind of get yourself organized that way. So you get your paper written, and you can do some minimal referencing so it doesn't slow you down. But you definitely don't want to be in the place later on in your career where you're like, I can't even remember what sources that I looked at, okay? And in the research method that I'm going to teach you in this class, you're going to find that, just like today, where you got 19, 20, 30 different sources, or 30 different ideas, I'm going to teach you a research practice that's going to give you about that many sources to choose from. So instead of it being hard for you to find sources, it's going to be super easy, and you're going to be like, I've got too much here. That's a good problem to have. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, that's going to be it for today, guys. I have enjoyed hanging out with you. The chat looks like it's working fantastic. If you didn't get your question submitted and you do have one, send it to me in an email or a message on Canvas, and I'd be happy to answer it later. Make sure you're keeping up with your assignments. Feel free to read ahead and do your reading summaries ahead of time. That's fine. It would be good to kind of be thinking about your topic and doing some writing about that topic. Next week, we're going to do free writing in class, and by the end of that class, you'll be ready to turn in that first assignment. Some of you might be ready now. Who knows? So have a great week, and I'll see you next time, okay? Bye-bye.